So, this is our fourth session, and we're starting with paragraph 51. And we're in the middle of the city of divine unity. And Baha'u'llah takes a fairly substantial digression from the theme of unity and values of unity an apparently substantial digression to introduce the topic of the sufferings of Muhammad and examining why he was denied by the people. And I say apparent digression because ultimately this whole digression can be seen as further to the subject of divine unity, which in the previous paragraphs last week we saw Baha'u'llah making a point about the seeker. When they come to this stage of the divine, of the spiritual quest, they see through the eye of unity and they recognize, all the prophets are actually the same, and in essence. But you can't start there. That's why you have to go through several stages to get there, because it's not just a naive declaration that everything's one and a kind of blindness towards the differences. You actually have to move through the earlier values and recognize the differences are also real. Mm-hmm. And there's, within their perspective, that's also a truthful way of looking at the world. Mm-hmm. But you have to sort of traverse through to get to the point where you see the deeper unity underneath. And this can be seen as the real overarching purpose of this book, and more broadly the overarching purpose of Baha'u'llah's entire mission in the world is to point out those deeper threads of unity that bind together what was thought to be the irreconcilable strands of humanity, different races, different religions, different nationalities, and so forth. And Baha'u'llah is giving us this beautiful lens to see through the differences, to acknowledge the differences and validate the differences, and at the same time to look at something more deeply. And so he begins by mentioning Muhammad. And as we'll see, especially if we were comparing this as we went along and reading the Kitab-i-Igan, in parallel to this, we would see huge parallels in the structure and in the content of the points he brings up here with what's in the Kitab-i-Igan. So he says, it's our wish at this juncture to discuss that which befell the point of the Quran, Muhammad, and to extol his remembrance, consider and reflect upon his days when the people assailed and denied and denounced him, how when he set foot in the streets and marketplaces, the people derided him, wagged their heads at him, and laughed him to scorn. Some of the histories of the time, I don't know if it's in the Quran or in the Hadith, they referred to Muhammad as a crazed poet. They thought that they misinterpreted, I suppose, the verses that he was revealing as a species of poetry, which was already a mode of the Arabian desert of the time, a mode of expression, and so Muhammad had to deal with this just complete rejection of his message. And as in the Kitab-i-Igan, Baha'u'llah primarily points a finger at who the primary instigators of this rejection were, and ultimately it's the leaders of religion. But as in the Kitab-i-Igan, he and I think very profoundly making Baha'u'llah's point about how he is trying to aim at unity and not further division, he is granting even the leaders of religion, the primary cause of the rejection of the prophets from Baha'u'llah's perspective, and thus the primary cause of so much suffering in the world. He gives them the benefit of the doubt in terms of acting in good faith. And I see this anyway in paragraph 53, where he says, if these wayward souls had indeed paused to reflect upon their conduct, recognize the sweet melodies of that mystic dove singing upon the twigs of this snow-white tree, embraced that which God hath revealed unto and bestowed upon them, and discovered the fruits of the tree of God upon its branches. Wherefore then did they reject and denounce him? Had they not lifted their heads to the heavens to implore his appearance? Had they not besought God at every moment to honor them with his beauty and sustain them through his presence? So this, I think, is a kind of an important moment, because he's saying, look, they were honestly, sincerely searching for the truth, but how is it then that they were led astray? But, he says, as they failed to recognize the accents of God and the divine mysteries and holy allusions enshrined in that which flowed from the tongue of Muhammad, and as they neglected to examine the matter in their own hearts, and followed instead those priests of error who have hindered the progress of the people in past dispensations and who will continue to do so in future cycles. They were thus veiled from the divine purpose, failed to quaff from the celestial streams, and deprived themselves of the presence of God, the manifestation of his essence, and the dayspring of his eternity. So it was a failure to understand the illusions, and then the next bunch of pages is going to be, here's how you understand the illusions.
Yeah.
Here's how you sort of look beneath that sort of surface of the exterior meanings of words to get down to the meaning of it. But this really strikes me because he's referring to these priests of error, who he says have been around in the past and will continue to be around in the future. So we're not rid of the priests of error.
Yeah.
We'll never be rid of them.
It's a cycle.
Everything is cyclical. And even Baha'u'llah's own revelation, even the centrality he gives it as marking a certain special moment in the history of the planet, sort of the attainment of maturity, so to speak, which could only have come at this time historically, when human civilization had reached a point where you can actually possibly talk about there being a single civilization, a single, perhaps, global governance structure that arises, an actual concept of the oneness of humanity. That couldn't have happened even just a couple hundred years before. You had entire tribes of humanity completely disconnected from others on different continents, and they all had to be kind of rediscovered over the last few hundred years. So in that sense, Baha'u'llah's coming is happenstance. It's a sort of accident of history that this particular prophetic revelation comes at this particular moment in time. But that's kind of what makes it special. But despite that, being able to identify a particular moment in time and say this is a special moment in history, Baha'u'llah never expresses finality for anything. Regarding his own message, it's going to be superseded in the future. Regarding the believers, the deniers, the priests of error, whatever, there's all a kind of cyclicality to it that extends back into the past as well as forward into the future. So we can expect the same divine drama to unfold at some future point, centuries into the future, not ever in exactly the same terms, but in essence, the same divine drama is going to unfold.
He talks about the yin and gone as well. I know there's parallels.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I found that very freeing, actually. Because it's sort of like, look, don't get too upset. Be detached, because this happens every time.
Yeah.
They always, they never see it.
They never see it.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
This is a part of the whole rhythm. And it was very freeing, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's always as Jesus says in the Bible, that he that hath an ear, let him hear. He that hath an eye, let him see. Mm-hmm. There's always a call to those who have the sort of the inner faculty to recognize. Yeah. And then there's always the majority that don't. And that's the sort of the archetype that's repeated. Then there's a big ask. He says, this is what they should have done. Paragraph 55. Had these souls but clung steadfastly to the handle of God manifested in the person of Muhammad, and presumably not the divines that followed him, had they turned wholly unto God and cast aside all they had learned from their divines, he would assuredly have guided them through his grace and acquainted them with the sacred truths that are enshrined within his imperishable utterances. But what else are they supposed to do? This is a huge ask. You say, if you had just ignored the divines, well, historically, they're kind of important. The priests are kind of an important part of the religious hierarchy. It's kind of an important part of how religions historically develop, and how they make their mark on the world, and how they stay together and united. So,
Yeah.
and Baha'u'llah is saying, if you only had ignored these people. So what's he prescribing for the future? I mean, if humanity has reached some sort of fundamental turning point, if maturity it marks a certain change of approach in the individual human, that you're no longer just, say, blindly following what your parents say because of their authority, and now you question the parents' authority, and now, well, hold on, you have some of your own authority as an adult.
Right.
What is humanity's authority? Now that humanity has attained maturity, or is in the process of attaining maturity in this crazy moment, does that mean we're dispensing with anything like a clergy going forward? Because the clergy are like your parents in the childhood of the race, and then once you achieve maturity, it's a different mode of connection to the divine. It doesn't have to be mediated through certain specially appointed people, with all the benefits that can give, but also with all the drawbacks of possible corruption, incentives towards acquiring power, whatever it is that's corrupted the clergy in the past. Those incentive structures are, that sort of innate desire for power, that's not going away. That's kind of part of our DNA. So what if you remove all of that? What if Baha'u'llah is tipping us off to a different way forward? But then how do we do it? That's something like it hasn't been done before. And we look in the past history of every religious community has something equivalent to a clergy, whether they call it a clergy or not, whether they say, I think Muslims would probably deny having a clergy in the sense that Christians have clergy.
Right.
But in essence, it's worked out the same. You have certain people who have certain degree of authority, literally over the life and death of people in their communities, as we've seen, as we see today with the Baha'i community. So he goes further into the reason for the denial of these leaders of religion in the next several paragraphs, particularly starting in paragraph 57 now. He says, "Know then that when Muhammad, the point of the Quran and the light of the All-Glorious, came with perspicuous verses and luminous proofs manifested in such signs as are beyond the power of all existence to produce, he bade all men follow this lofty and outstretched path in accordance with the precepts that he had brought from God. Whoso acknowledged him, recognized the signs of God in his inmost being, and saw in his beauty the changeless beauty of God, the decree of," and now a bunch of key phrases that people interpret very literally, "the decree of resurrection, ingathering, life, and paradise was passed upon him. For he who had believed in God and in the manifestation of his beauty was raised from the grave of heedlessness, gathered together in the sacred ground of the heart, quickened to the life of faith and certitude, and admitted into the paradise of the divine presence." So just beautifully, with these beautiful turns of phrase, takes these very literalistically interpreted things and gives them this kind of symbolic realignment of meaning into the spiritual realm. What paradise can be loftier than this? What ingathering mightier? And what resurrection greater? Indeed, should a soul be acquainted with these mysteries, he would grasp that which none other hath fathomed. And he really is going to get into this question of resurrection and life, which is relevant not just to Muslim sort of ideas of the sort of their prophetic expectations, but Christian ones as well, with the resurrection of the dead.
That's why I think either after Egon or Jim's, I have now read the Baha'i writings through a different lens also. Yeah. That when we talk about life and death and heaven and the Abha kingdom and all those things, to me they are no longer actual places. They're symbolic of life on earth right now.
And literally the next 10 paragraphs is going to be exactly this.
And that's probably was from this that I got then. Even our own writings are metaphors. They're not actually to be taken as literal.
Mm-hmm. But first he starts with paradise, and then he goes into what true life and true resurrection is. He says, "Know then that the paradise that appeareth in the day of God surpasseth every other paradise, and excelleth the realities of heaven. For when God, blessed and glorified be he, sealed the station of prophethood in the person of him who was his friend, his chosen one, and his treasure amongst his creatures. He's referring to Muhammad and this idea of Muhammad being the seal of the prophets. As hath been revealed from the kingdom of glory. But he is the apostle of God and the seal of the prophets. He promised all men that they shall attain unto his own presence in the day of resurrection. In this he meant to emphasize the greatness of the revelation to come, as it hath indeed been manifested through the power of truth. And there is of a certainty no paradise greater than this, no station higher, should ye reflect upon the verses of the Quran. Blessed be he who knoweth of a certainty that he shall attain unto the presence of God on that day when his beauty shall be made manifest. And this idea of what's the meaning of attaining the presence of God is a major theme of part 2 of the Kitab Yagan. So again, this can be read really usefully in parallel with the Kitab Yagan to see more about the attainment to the divine presence. So he says, so it's not a literal thing. It's not literally you're raised to the dead and Jesus comes down from the cloud, or Muhammad, or the whatever the promised Qa'im comes, or whoever, and there's a literal meeting. That presence is the presence of attainment to the reality of, which one, obviously, very, very few people could physically have done that.
Yeah.
During the lifetime of the prophet. I mean, a vanishingly small number of people could have actually physically attained the presence. So in a way, it's kind of an obvious interpretation. It has to be meant in some other way. So then he goes on, and also in paragraph 61 now, it's not just the positive things that have to be reinterpreted symbolically, life, ingathering, paradise, and so forth. It's also the negative things. He, however, who denied God and his truth, who turned his back upon him and rebelled, who disbelieved and made mischief, the verdict of impiety, blasphemy, death, and fire was passed upon him. For what blasphemy is greater than to turn unto the manifestations of Satan, to follow the doctors of oblivion and the people of rebellion? So that's the true death. Then is the death of the spirit, and he gives an example of a past literalistic interpretation in paragraph 62. During the days of the pagan Arabs living in the time of Muhammad, Muhammad says to them, he said, those who believed in Muhammad dwelt in our midst and associated with us day and night. When did they die? And when were they raised again to life? Just looking at it literally. Hearken unto that which was revealed in reply. If ever thou dost marvelous surely is their saying. What, when we have become dust and moldering bones, shall we be restored in a new creation? And in another passage, and if thou shouldst say, after death ye shall surely be raised again, the infidels will certainly exclaim, this is naught but palpable sorcery. Thus did they mock and deride him, for they had read in their books and heard from their divines the terms life and death, and understood them as this elemental life and physical death. And hence, when they found not that which their vain imaginings and their false and wicked minds had conceived, they hoisted the banners of discord and the standards of sedition, and kindled the flame of war. God, however, quenched it through the power of his might, as thou seest again in this day, with these infidels and evildoers. Now he says, I'm going to tell you what the true meaning of life and death is. He says, at this hour, when the sweet savors of attraction have wafted over me from the everlasting city, when transports of yearning have seized me from the land of splendors, at the dawning of the day star of the worlds above the horizon of Iraq, and the sweet melodies of Hejaz have brought to mine ears the mysteries of separation, I have purposed to relate unto thine eminence a portion of that which the mystic dove hath warbled in the midmost heart of paradise, as to the true meaning of life and death. The mystic dove is Jesus. So he's gonna quote from the Bible about this. Though the task be impossible, for were I to interpret these words for thee, as it hath been inscribed in the guarded tablets, all the books and pages of the world could not contain it, nor could the souls of men bear its weight. I shall nonetheless mention that which beseemeth this day and age, that it might serve as a guidance unto whosoever desireth to gain admittance into the retreats of glory in the realms above. I love how he says that which beseemeth this day and age. Everything he says is always conditioned to time and place. And to be numbered with those who have severed themselves from all save God and who in this day rejoice in the presence of their Lord. So this, kind of the title of the book, this is like one of the gems of divine mysteries that he's relating. Which, when he says it's kind of an obvious thing, but it has very unobvious consequences. Know then that life hath a twofold meaning. The first pertaineth to the appearance of man in an elemental body, and is as manifest to thine eminence and to others as the midday sun. This life cometh to an end with physical death, which is a God-ordained and inescapable reality. That life, however, which is mentioned in the books of the prophets and the chosen ones of God, is the life of knowledge, that is to say, the servant's recognition of the sign of the splendors wherewith he who is the source of all splendor hath himself invested him, and his certitude of attaining unto the presence of God through the manifestations of his cause. This is that blessed and everlasting life that perisheth not. Whosoever is quickened thereby shall never die, but will endure as long as his Lord and Creator will endure. Well, there's a bit to unpack from this. I mean, it's a big sentence, and there's a lot of parts in the sentence. So first of all, he says, so true life, the life mentioned by the prophets, is the life of knowledge. What's the word? Because knowledge is one of those words that can have a lot of different underlying words in the Arabic. And the word in the Arabic here is interesting. And maybe knowledge wasn't quite the best translation for it, but the word was erfaniyeh. So it's erfaniyeh life. And erfan is more often translated in the Baha'i writings as recognition, or let's say mystical. It's more of a mystical thing than knowledge in the sense of book learning. Intuition. It's more like intuition. It's more like direct perception of something. So it's the life of this erfani knowledge. It's the life of mystic knowledge. And then he just says, that is to say, the servant's recognition, and again, that's the word erfan. So the word erfan appears twice, right, in succession. So it's not a matter of knowing something, like someone told me, okay, now I know that it's the case. It's something entirely different. It's a heart knowledge. Yeah. So what is the heart knowledge that he's talking about? It's this heart knowledge of the sign of the splendors wherewith he who is the source of all splendor hath himself invested him.
Where are you?
This is that one sentence, the kind of key sentence 60, on the meaning of life. It's in paragraph 64.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So a recognition of something, a sign of the splendor of God, with which we have been invested. That reminds me a lot of Arabic hidden word number, 3 or 4, one of the first hidden words. Turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting. Or, with the hands of power I made thee, with the fingers of strength I created thee, and within thee have I placed the essence of my light. That sort of inwardness, the immanent God as opposed to the transcendent Godhead. So something about the recognition of the immanent Godhead, that sign of the splendors wherewith he is the source of all splendor hath himself invested him, and his certitude of attaining unto the presence of God through the manifestations of his cause. Certitude here is egon, and this attaining to the presence of God is that same presence of God that's like a major theme of the Kitab Egon. So it's something about not even the attainment of, but it's the certitude of attaining to. So it's an interesting way that he's describing true life. True life is not even an attainment, but it's a sort of orientation towards eventually, but believing in one's heart that one is eventually going to attain. So it's more like a process then. It's like a process of the recognition of our inner divinity, perhaps.
So in the first sentence of the Kitabi Akdas, that the first thing one has to do is to recognize him and abide by his laws.
Yes.
Are those words translated could they be translated more in the spiritual sense as opposed to the legalistic?
That's how in the margin I put verses Kitabi Akdas paragraph 1. So I also was thinking of the same thing.
Because get married.
Yeah, we're gonna get married.
They're meant to be.
Because I'm wondering whether that should be interpreted differently now.
Right. Yeah. So paragraph 1 of the Kitabi Akdas, Baha'u'llah says that there are twin duties, and the first is the recognition of him who represented the Godhead in both the kingdom of his cause and the world of creation, who to achieve this duty hath attained unto all good. He said this is the first duty, is recognition of him who representeth the Godhead in the kingdom of his cause in the world of creation. The Logos.
That's what I'm wondering.
I mean, Jesus or Muhammad, whichever faith tradition you come from, there's a point of recognition that is important to recognize.
Yeah.
So Baha'u'llah in the Kitabi Akta says that's the first duty. And the second duty, he says, is obedience to whatever they say. So there's a humbling of oneself and a following in the way, and preceding that there's a recognition of the incarnation of the Logos.
But this
And
obedience is like, it's this, what I'm learning now from all of this writings is that the obedience is, he even says that if they say light is light, if light is dark, believe in it. Like whatever they say is the obedience.
It's
like,
the earth
so
is
here
sky.
we are being told by the last manifestation all the things to look for the next manifestation. Then the next manifestation comes, they're not doing the things that we've asked, that we were told to look for. And then they are like, no, I'm the next manifestation. And then we're supposed to be Erfan and obedient to whatever the new thing is. That's insane.
yeah, it's a big ask.
I mean, we're trying really hard.
It's a big ask.
It's a big ask.
It's such a hard thing to like. There must be something behind that obedience where it's like you can't take everything so seriously, or you can't follow things just because you were told to follow those things, but please be obedient to the next one. Come on, talk to me.
The obedience, I've heard, who was it who said why is the ocean so vast? It's because it places itself below all the rivers, and so all the rivers flow into it. And that's what makes the ocean what it is it's sort of, it puts itself lower than everything else.
Yeah.
So there's something about that humbling oneself, something about, letting go of oneself, and
You don't know everything.
and in the doing, one is filled up. In the emptying out of the ego, that makes room for the divine water to fill it.
But God made ego.
Yeah, it's part of the.
And ego is the one mysterious struggle we must always have to encounter in every single dispensation, right? Like ego is what the clergy now have as their driving force, is what drives them in their. They had during the Judaism was the ego of the rabbis. Then they had the Pharisees, right?
Except you could be obedient to the contemplative stance, the contemplative mind, rather than the, rationalistic, dualistic mind.
Yeah.
And in that contemplative, sincere contemplative place, that is the mystical point.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know how people who practice, contemplation as a regular, daily practice, they're getting somewhere much further than I am in just rationally thinking physical about it.
Yeah.
But you just look at all the mystics throughout history. They were right there. It was something utterly experiential that gave them, the belief in this divine power of God at work in all of us.
And I wonder if part of that same thing, going back to the hidden word that you just mentioned a minute ago, Stephen, that behold, I am standing within you, that our sort of political sense of what obedience means is that it doesn't matter how much you know, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. This one who's in charge has the right to compel your behavior and eliminate your freedom, so that your freedom has to be sacrificed to the authority of this person. Maybe the part of, I don't know quite how to say this, but part of the mystical point is that what if the anthropology, as it were, of how God and man are in sync in God's plan is that to be deeply obedient means to find the way you are actually in charge when you are letting God be in charge. So that it isn't this sort of dastardly subservience that makes us feel like, the political notion of subservience.
Because if
It's
God
a
is within
physical-
you, then you're just,
Yes.
if God is already within you, aren't you just simply living through God?
Yes, and I guess the question would be, all of this is in a certain tension, because we are supposed to submit to God because we're kind of clueless about how God is that way in us, and we're moving toward that.
Keep following men. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we move toward that place where we can truly see God standing in us and be freed to know that when I embrace God and I detach from the central role of my ego and say, all I really want is to be the God in me. And at that point, I'm finally free. I'm not in obedience in the sense that I've lost my freedom. I'm in freedom because I'm obedient to the one who created me, and by being who he wants me to be, I'm finally free.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful Jesuit prayer called the Suscipe, and it's basically, take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my will, my understanding, everything, because you've given all to me. All I ask is for your love and your grace. That is enough for me. And that's kind of that's putting yourself in that place of the ocean at the lowest point. Everything moves into,
There's a Baha'i prayer that says, "Make me a hollow reed, that I may be." So that from which the pith of self hath been blown, so that I may become a clear channel through which thy grace may flow to others. And that becoming of a hollow reed, that hollowing out of the pith of self is death of self. What some of the mystics describe as death, annihilation. Baha'u'llah talks about it in those terms in the Seven Valleys. The seventh valley is the valley of annihilation, and that's contrasted with the life that follows. And this next paragraph also, I think, helps us further with that, and
What
how
paragraph is that?
we're at 65 now, and how it and how different it is from what we think the actual juncture is between our physical life ending and then the next life, when we get to heaven then after we die. That's kind of the traditional way of thinking about it. And what Baha'u'llah is saying, I think, in these few paragraphs is that's the wrong pivot point. The pivot point is actually between life and death, is not our physical death, but the death of our soul. I'm not in ourself. The death of ourself, and then living in God. And that death can happen at anywhere. It can happen after our physical death, perhaps, or it can happen before our physical death. And Baha'u'llah quotes from that in paragraph 65.
Sorry, you're breaking me. Okay.
He says, the first life which pertaineth to the elemental body will come to an end, as hath been revealed by God. Every soul shall taste of death. But the second life, which ariseth from the knowledge of God, and here knowledge is another form of erfan, ma'rifat, knoweth no death, as hath been revealed aforetime. Him will we surely quicken to a blessed life. And in another passage concerning the martyrs, nay, they are alive and sustained by their Lord. And from the traditions or hadith of Islam, he who is a true believer liveth both in this world and in the world to come. That's a great one, because you kind of have your cake and eat it too, in a way. I mean, you're living physically, and you're living in that world to come while you're still on this plane. Numerous examples of similar words to be found in the books of God and of the embodiments of his justice. For the sake of brevity, however, we have contented ourselves with the above passages. O my brother, forsake thine own desires. Turn thy face unto thy Lord, and walk not in the footsteps of those who have taken their corrupt inclinations for their God, that perchance thou mightest find shelter in the heart of existence beneath the redeeming shadow of him who traineth all names and attributes. For they who turn away from their Lord in this day are in truth accounted among the dead. Though to outward seeming they may walk upon the earth, amongst the deaf, though they may hear, and amongst the blind, though they may see, as hath been clearly stated by him who is the Lord of the day of reckoning. Hearts have they with which they understand not, and eyes have they with which they see not. They walk the edge of a treacherous bank, and tread the brink of a fiery abyss. They partake not of the billows of this surging and treasure-laden ocean, but disport themselves with their own idle words. In this connection, we will relate unto thee that which was revealed of old concerning life, that perchance it may turn thee away from the promptings of self, deliver thee from the narrow confines of thy prison in this gloomy plain, and aid thee to become of them that are guided aright in the darkness of this world. He saith, and he verily speaketh the truth, shall the dead whom we have quickened, and for whom we have ordained a light, whereby he may walk amongst men, be like him whose likeness is in the darkness whence he will not come forth. This verse was revealed with respect to Hamzeh and Abu Jahl, the former of whom was a believer while the latter disbelieved, obviously during the lifetime of Muhammad. Most of the pagan leaders mocked and derided it, were agitated and clamored, how did Hamzeh die? And how was he restored to his former life? Were ye to examine carefully the verses of God, ye would find many such statements recorded in the book. So obviously Hamzeh was still physically alive. Would that pure and stainless hearts could be found, that I might impart unto them a sprinkling from the oceans of knowledge which my Lord hath bestowed upon me, so that they may soar in the heavens even as they walk upon the earth, and speed over the waters even as they course the land, and that they may take up their souls in their hands and lay them down in the path of their Creator. Howbeit, leave hath not been granted to divulge this mighty secret. Indeed, it hath from everlasting been a mystery enshrined within the treasuries of his power, and a secret concealed within the repositories of his might, lest his faithful servants forsake their own lives in the hope of attaining this most great station in the realms of eternity. Nor shall they who wander in this oppressive darkness ever attain unto it. O my brother, at every juncture we have restated our theme, that all that hath been recorded in these verses may by the leave of God be made clear unto thee, and that thou mayest become independent of those who are plunged in the darkness of self, and to tread the valley of arrogance and pride, and be of them that move within the paradise of everlasting life. And now he quotes from Jesus in paragraph 71. Say, O people, the tree of life hath verily been planted in the heart of the heavenly paradise, and bestoweth life in every direction. How can ye fail to perceive and recognize it? It will, in truth, aid thee to grasp all that this well-assured soul hath disclosed unto thee of the essence of the divine mysteries. The dove of holiness, and that's Jesus, warbleth in the heaven of immortality, and admonisheth thee to array thyself with a new vesture, wrought of steel, to shield thee from the shafts of doubt concealed in the illusions of men, saying, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I said unto thee, ye must be born again. Well, paragraph 71 ends this particular bracket, this particular digression, parentheses on the meaning of life and death. And then the next paragraph begins another sort of parentheses, which is another sort of example of reinterpretation of symbolic terms. And this comes from the book of Revelation of St. John of Patmos, the final book of the New Testament. So Baha'u'llah says, "Wing then thy flight unto this divine tree and partake of its fruits. Gather up that which hath fallen therefrom and guard it faithfully. Meditate then upon the utterance of one of the prophets, as he intimated to the souls of men through veiled allusions and hidden symbols, the glad tidings of the one who is to come after him, that thou mayest know of a certainty that their words are inscrutable to all save those who are endued with an understanding heart. He saith, his eyes were as a flame of fire, and brass-like were his feet, and out of his mouth goeth a two-edged sword." How could these words be literally interpreted? Were anyone to appear with all these signs, he would assuredly not be human.
That's true.
And how could any soul seek his company? Nay, should he appear in one city, even the inhabitants of the next would flee from him, nor would any soul dare approach him. So he says, but behold, nevertheless, they're waiting this being with the sword out of his mouth and with brass for feet. But he says, nor would they ever bear allegiance unto him, except that he appear in the aforementioned form. And as such a being will never appear, so too will they never believe.
I was always scared as a child. Like, this is what's coming? Like, I
Yeah.
was always, frightened by this, tattoo on the...
That's a
on
terrifying
it's
prophecy
terrifying.
in
It's that
Revelation.
It sounds like he's going to
Yeah.
come in and start killing people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he says, I will briefly explain the true meaning of this utterance. And he takes a long paragraph for each of the three.
Yeah.
The eyes of a flame of fire, the brass-like were his feet, and out of his mouth goeth the two-edged sword. So the first one is eyes flame of fire in paragraph 75. He says, know then that he who uttered these words in the realms of glory meant to describe the attributes of the one who is to come in such veiled and enigmatic terms as to elude the understanding of the people of error. Now, when he saith his eyes were as a flame of fire, he alludeth but to the keenness of sight and acuteness of vision of the promised one, who with his eyes burneth away every veil and covering, maketh known the eternal mysteries in the contingent world, and distinguisheth the faces that are obscured with the dust of hell from those that shine with the light of paradise. Were his eyes not made of the blazing fire of God, how could he consume every veil and burn away that which the people possess? How could he behold the signs of God and the kingdom of his names and the world of creation? This is all just like a bravura performance.
Yeah, it's like, of course.
Yeah, let me just...
I mean,
of course it's this way.
It's gonna be
Yeah.
fire eyes.
So in the next paragraph, as to the words brass-like were his feet, by this is meant his constancy upon hearing the call of God that commandeth him, be thou steadfast as thou hast been bidden. He shall so persevere in the cause of God and evince such firmness in the path of his might, that even if all the powers of earth and heaven were to deny him, he would not waver in the proclamation of his cause, nor flee from his command in the promulgation of his laws. Nay, rather, he will stand as firm as the highest mountains and the loftiest peaks. He will remain immovable in his obedience to God and steadfast in revealing his cause and proclaiming his word. And then sort of more on that theme. And then the two-edged sword in paragraph 77. Know thou that since the sword is an instrument that divideth and cleaveth asunder, and since there proceedeth from the mouth of the prophets and the chosen ones of God that which separateth the believer from the infidel and the lover from the beloved, this term hath been so employed. And apart from this dividing and separating, no other meaning is intended. Thus, when he who is the primal point and the eternal Son, the Bob, desireth by the leave of God to gather together all creation, to raise them up from the graves of their own selves, and to divide them one from the other, he shall pronounce but one verse from him. And this verse will distinguish truth from error from this day unto the day of resurrection. Baha'u'llah refers to the same pronouncing of one verse that divides in the Kitab-i-Iqan, paragraph 118 of the Kitab-i-Iqan. But he doesn't say what the verse is. What sword is sharper than this heavenly sword? What blade more trenchant than this incorruptible steel that severeth every tie and separateth thereby the believer from the infidel, father from son, brother from sister, and lover from beloved? For whoso believeth in that which hath been revealed unto him is a true believer, and whoso turneth away is an infidel. And such an irrevocable separation occurreth between them that they will cease to consort and associate with each other in this world. And so it is between father and son. For should the son believe and the father deny, they will be severed and forever dissociated from each other. Jesus says the same thing in the New Testament about divine. I bring a sword and I'm dividing father from son.
Right.
Nay, thou seest, witnesseth how the Son slayeth the Father, and the Father the Son. Consider in the same light all that we have explained and related unto thee. So this is all then about the power of separation of that divine and invisible sword. But he says in paragraph 79, the people have failed to understand and remain veiled. Then there's a few more paragraphs, and then we'll get sort of to the end of where we were planning to end today. First of all, sort of returning to the theme of the corrupt leaders of religion, and just exhorting the people to see with their inner eye. He says, "We render thanks unto God for that which he hath bestowed upon us of his grace. He it is who hath caused us to be assured of the truth of his faith, a faith which the combined forces of earth and heaven are powerless to resist. It is he who hath enabled us to acknowledge him in the day of his presence," this is referring to the Bab, "to testify unto him whom God shall make manifest in the latter resurrection," this is Baha'u'llah himself, "and to be among them that have believed in him ere his appearance," I'm not sure who that's referring to, "that his favor may be made complete unto us and to all mankind. But hear, O my brother, my plaint against them that claim to be associated with God and with the manifestations of his knowledge, and yet follow their corrupt inclinations, consume the substance of their neighbor, are given to wine, commit murder, defraud and slander each other." He's referring to the Muslim clergy that kind of would, even though Muhammad prohibited the drinking of alcohol, they would sometimes drink wine, and are wont to speak falsely. The people attribute all these deeds unto us, while their perpetrators remain shameless before God. They cast aside that which he hath enjoined upon them, and commit that which he hath forbidden. Yet it behooveth the people of truth that the signs of humility should shine upon their faces, that the light of sanctity should radiate from their countenances, that they should walk upon the earth as though they were in the presence of God, and distinguish themselves in their deeds from all the dwellers of the earth. Such must be their state, that their eyes should behold the evidences of his might, their tongues and hearts make mention of his name, their feet be set towards the land of his nearness, and their hands take fast hold upon his precepts. So it's a sort of prescription to the clergy. "And were they to pass through a valley of pure gold and mines of precious silver, they should regard them as wholly unworthy of their attention. These people, however, have turned aside from all this, and placed instead their affections upon that which accordeth with their own corrupt inclinations. Thus do they roam in the wilderness of arrogance and pride. I bear witness at this moment that God is wholly quit of them, and likewise are we. We beseech God to suffer us not to associate with them, either in this life or in the life to come. He verily is the eternal truth. No God is there but him, and his might is equal to all things." Baha'u'llah is quite fed up with the clergy. We can deduce from this. As was the Bab. They both suffered quite a bit at the hands of the narrow-minded mullahs of the day.
That was George Fox, who spent a lot of his life in prison too.
Mm-hmm.
He did not.
The founder of the Quakers.
Yeah,
Quakers,
except the clergy.
This is only the tip of the iceberg. I remember when I was in Haifa looking at some manuscripts of just compilations of others who had done before, had just compiled works of Baha'u'llah, letters and tablets of Baha'u'llah, just on the theme of how bad the clergy are and how far they've strayed from the path of truth and so forth. It was a big volume of it was a common theme of Baha'u'llah's writings. But he ends this section, and then paragraph 84 returns to the thread of the valleys. But the very end of this digression then is paragraph 83, where he says, "Quaff then, O my brother, from the living waters that we have caused to flow in the oceans of these words. Methinks the seas of grandeur are surging within them, and the gems of divine virtue are shining within and upon them. Divest then thyself of that which debarreth thee from this fathomless crimson sea, and to the cry of, in the name of God and by his grace, immerse thyself therein. Let the fear of no one dismay thee. Trust in the Lord thy God, for he is sufficient unto whosoever trusteth in him. He verily shall protect thee, and in him shalt thou abide in safety. So, the goal next week is to finish.
Yeah.
So paragraphs 84 to 117.